The quiet turning of light. The email that arrived like weather. The email arrived on a Wednesday that smelled faintly of rain and oranges. Dakota Johnson was watering basil on her balcony when her phone vibrated with a subject line that seemed almost shy about itself. Subject: Harbor Lights, offer, confidential. She read it once, then twice, and then, because some news insists on silence first, she set the phone face down on the table and listened to the pause gather itself. A coastal drama, small crew, European financing, intimate scale, a story about two architects repairing a storm-broken library in a fishing town where nothing stays unobserved for long. Filming in late winter, and the line that pried her breath a little wider. Proposed colleague, Jamie Dornan. The name did not knock. It simply stood in the doorway of her morning, patient and familiar, bringing with it the delicate inconvenience of memory and the steadier relief of time passed kindly. She replied, "I'd like to read in print. Please courier a hard copy." Then she stood very still, the watering can suspended above the basil, and let the possibility bloom. The same sky, another coast. Across an ocean and a handful of rain clouds, Jamie Dornan was helping his youngest find a lost glove. When the glove was rescued from the couch, there was laughter in it. When the house had been kissed into the day, there was quiet. That was when his agent called. Independent, gentle budget, gorgeous script. Working title, Harbor Lights. And, well, you'd be paired with Dakota. He did not answer for 2 long seconds. In those 2 seconds, an old ache woke and stretched, found it wasn't an ache anymore but something softer, like a healed scar learning it could just be part of the skin. "Send it," he said. "Paper, please. No PDF." When the package arrived, he took it to the cafe that knew how to leave him alone. By page 10, he'd forgotten to drink his coffee. By page 20, he'd underlined nothing because everything seemed to underline itself. By page 30, he heard her voice on a line about a roofline in the wind, and he smiled as if a friend had come in from the rain. The table read with no table. They met for a first read in a borrowed rehearsal room in London with windows too high to see anything but weather. The director, a gentle force with the just woke hair of someone who dreams in shot lists, poured tea for everyone and said, "We'll sit on the floor if you don't mind, tables make people pretend more than they intend." So they sat cross-legged like apprentices and opened their scripts to page 1. They did not hug. They did not narrate the past to the room. They said hello the way good sailors do, with their eyes, confirming the sea was shared. "Dakota," he said. "Jamie," she said. And the name exchange, small as a match strike, made a circle of warmth that would not go out. They began. The story was humble in the way humility is brave. A seaside town, a library hollowed by storm, 2 architects with contrasting philosophies hired to restore what the wind had misread. Her character loved glass and light and the democracy of open rooms. His character trusted stone, corners, the grammar of shelter. The script asked them to disagree beautifully until they learned that beauty is a kind of agreement in itself. Where the script left silence, they left silence. Where it asked for a hand to hover and not touch, they hovered and did not touch. When the director whispered, "Stop there," no one complained because the moment had landed on its exact feet. After, the room remained hushed, as if choices could still hear themselves. "Tea?" the director offered. "Please," Dakota and Jamie said at once, and laughed, not at each other, but with the timing that collaboration slowly re-teaches you until you remember you never unlearned it. The town that wasn't looking for a film. Production chose a town that didn't audition, a scallop of harbor on the Atlantic rim where gulls spoke fluent sarcasm and fishermen nodded at the sea like a colleague they respected. The library sat on a small hill as if to keep an eye on everyone, its windows boarded, its steps bruised by weather. The townspeople treated the crew the way they treat weather, with resigned affection and good soup. Their first day in the library tasted of dust and potential. A shaft of winter light laid itself across a table like a cloth. Dakota slipped on work gloves and said, "If we're going to pretend to rebuild, we should at least flirt with actual repair." Jamie grinned and lifted a plank with a seriousness that had nothing to do with pretending. Between takes, they walked the harbor with paper cups. They didn't perform nostalgia. They let it be a friendly passerby who nodded and continued on. She told him about a poem that had taught her to forgive her own beginnings. He told her about teaching his children to trust the small heroics of ordinary days. At night, in the little inn where doors still clicked instead of sighed, she read scenes by lamplight and wrote questions in the margins. He learned lines out loud, discovering where breath wanted to rest. No one rushed them. The schedule was tight but not cruel. The town's church bell gentled each hour into the next, as if time were a neighbor bearing scones. The first shot that knew its own name. They set the lens for a scene in which she measures light with a homemade device and he argues for the angle of the roof. It's a simple argument, two compass needles vibrating toward a true north that neither owns. Light forgives, her character says. Structure remembers his answers. On the second take, the words were not lines anymore. They were truisms disguised as dialogue, touching the places neither character had yet named. The camera, obedient and kind, recorded without interrupting. Again, the director said, and then, after they did not change anything, perfect. Don't improve it. They didn't try. The winter sun, flattered by the attention, lingered 10 minutes longer than weather almanacs consider polite. How a town teaches two people to sit. What no one scheduled taught them the most: the waiting, the light resets, the tea you drink with both hands because the wind would otherwise steal it. They learned how to sit on low stone walls and talk about nothing on purpose until the nothing opened the gate to everything. One afternoon, a child from the town wandered into a rehearsal and asked, with the brutal sincerity children keep polished, "Are you two married?" Both laughed. "No," Jamie said. "Not to each other," Dakota added, friendly as a lighthouse. "Then why do you look like you're about to be?" the child asked, unimpressed by adult euphemisms. "Because," Dakota said after a beat, "we're practicing kindness." The child nodded, as if that were the sort of answer a town like this would accept. Later, the child brought them drawings of the library with wings. The day the roof taught them the sky. One of the great set pieces was a roof sequence, hammer, slate, sea-swallowing horizon, where the characters finally admit they're repairing the same wound from two directions. They had rehearsed the choreography: step, nail, lift, pause. He hands her a tile, she catches without looking. They had not rehearsed the sky. Mid-shot, the cloud cover tore like paper and the sun poured down with theater in its blood. The slate went warm. Jamie blinked hard and then didn't blink at all. Dakota looked up, and that unscripted look carried every unwritten sentence the film had been storing. "Don't stop," the director breathed into his scarf. "That's the scene." The boom op wept. The gulls tried not to be moved and failed. When the sun decided it had made its point and left again, the camera held a last second of what it felt like to be understood. "Cut," the director said, and no one clapped because the clap had already happened, inside. They climbed down the scaffold in a hush that had nothing to do with fear of falling. "Thank you," she said, and he could not tell if she meant the weather or the work or the years that had taught them both how to receive such a day. "Yes," he said. It was the right answer. Letters left in the same place. Sundays belonged to a ritual they never named. After morning call, she'd tuck a folded page into the library's atlas under the map of the coast. He'd return the next day and find it. She wrote in ink that bled at the edges like kindness. He wrote in pencil, the way builders do when they expect to erase and refine. Her letter. "We used to play at certainty. I find I prefer the company of questions now. Thank you for choosing to ask them out loud with me." His letter. "Some days the world feels like a knot. Today the knot looks more like a braid. Either way, I'm grateful for the rope." They never talked about the letters out loud. The film held them, Perhaps the town did. The winter festival that wasn't about them. Halfway through the shoot, the town's winter festival arrived with lanterns that looked like halved moons and a parade that refused to be embarrassed by joy. The crew was urged, ordered, really, to come. The director said no one was allowed to be tasteful about hot cider. A fiddler with a hat older than 3 summers played a reel that invited feet to forget themselves. Someone tugged Jamie's sleeve, someone else tugged Dakota's, and suddenly they were in the square, learning a circle dance that forgives missteps as long as you keep laughing. They weren't a couple, weren't pretending to be, weren't performing history. They were 2 people being briefly rearranged by music into the same geometry. Later, after fireworks that made reasonable promises to the sky, they walked the quiet harbor with paper cones of sugared walnuts. "How did we ever think happiness had to be loud?" she asked. "Because we were loud then," he said, smiling. "Now we get to be accurate." They stood in front of the dark library and watched their breath make small ghosts. He wanted to say "I'm proud of us" and realized he didn't need to. The work was saying it for him, better. A phone call that didn't ruin anything. A gossip site found out where they were. A headline tried to be clever, tried to sell old weather as new storm. Management's phones suffered, the publicist prepared ellipses. The world did what the world does when boredom wants to dress up as outrage. The director knocked softly on their dressing room doors. "I can keep you from it for a while," he said, "but not forever." "We're fine," Jamie said. "We're working," Dakota added. "Let them write their weather. We have our own forecast." "Fair and clearing," Jamie said. "Occasional honesty with sunny spells," she finished. They stood at the library's broken window and looked out at real sky, real water, real townspeople walking home with bread. Rumors seemed suddenly small beside a sea that did not, could not, care. The scene they weren't ready for, but were. Toward the end of the schedule came the confession scene the script held like breath. No kisses. No orchestral swell, just 2 people in the half-built reading room, talking about the difference between repairing a building and repairing themselves. "I used to think love was a design problem," her character says. "Choose the right lines, the right materials, and the rest will stand." "And I used to think love was a shelter," his replies. "Strong walls, any weather." "What do we think now?" she asks. "That love is the light we agree to carry, even when it isn't ours," he says. "And that being kind is better than being right." The words were on the page, yes, but something else happened. Something like the roof scene and also unlike it. Their faces learned gentleness the way hands do after a long day of careful work. The camera didn't dare move. The room, which had been full of hammered nails and sawdust and argument, became briefly a chapel where only true things fit. "Cut," the director whispered when the moment finished itself. Then he swallowed and said, "Thank you, because sometimes the only appropriate direction is gratitude." Goodbye, not as ending. Wrap day arrived the way departures do, with surprising punctuality. The town brought scones and a kind of soup that tastes like protection. The library, less broken now, more itself, smelled of cedar and fresh paint and a future the crew would not live in but would always claim. Hugs were practical and, therefore, dear. On the hill after last shots, Dakota and Jamie stood where the town could be seen pretending not to watch them. "Thank you for the work," she said. "Thank you for the grace," he said. They did not promise anything dramatic, because drama had no turf left to claim. They exchanged book recommendations and a joke about gulls and the sort of smile 2 people learn when the past has stopped trying to win. He reached out, and they shook hands. It felt like a ceremony invented on the day for exactly this moment, neither too little nor too much. Then she walked down to the car that would take her to the Lille airport, and he stayed a few minutes longer, letting the wind tidy his thoughts. The film finds its name. Post-production turned winter into rhythm. In a small cutting room beside a bakery, the editor laid scenes down like planks. The score came almost by accident. A cellist who understood restraint, a clarinetist who believed in mercy. The title changed, as titles do when they forgive themselves for trying too hard. Harbor Lights became the quiet turning of light. At a private friends and family screening in June, the film made a roomful of people sit with their hands visible, as if honesty were contagious. A line from the confession scene traveled straight to a place in the chest that doesn't often get mail. Someone wrote on a response card, "It's a love story that doesn't insist on ownership." Someone else wrote, "I called my father after. We talked like architecture." The distributor promised a careful release. The town mailed a photograph of the library's new windows glittering with summer. Underneath, the child who had asked if they were married had printed, in bold pencil, "Thank you for fixing the house that keeps our books safe." The library had wings in the drawing, still. A premiere that chose smallness. The premiere was not a storm. It was a bay, a modest theater, a modest carpet, a line of town carnations in jars. They arrived separately, as people with separate lives do, and then found each other beside a poster that did not lie about what the film was. "Nervous?" he asked. "Only in the way that means I care," she said. They posed for photographs with a gentleness that made flashes feel almost polite. Questions were asked and answered with the simplest adjectives available: true, careful, earned. In the lobby, an elderly couple told them they'd been married 43 years and still argued about windows versus walls. The couple held hands while arguing. Jamie and Dakota grinned like people who had just been handed living proof. Inside, when the first swell of ocean light filled the screen, they both exhaled. On screen, their characters began again. In the seats, two actors let themselves be simply audience. When the confession scene arrived, the theater got so quiet that even the projector decided not to complain. Applause at the end came like tide over stones, steady, patient, grateful. They thanked the crowd, thanked the town, thanked the crew by name. Outside, the night had the decency to be mild. "Tea?" she asked after the last handshake. "Tea," he said. The after. In the months that followed, the film did something rare. It helped people choose gentler words. It played in small cinemas where owners knew your name and where posters for older films never came down. Viewers stepped into the dark carrying weeks they hadn't known were heavy, and stepped out feeling like someone had quietly shared the load. Jamie sent Dakota a photograph of a lighthouse with a beam that looked like it had a conscience. "Found this on a run. Reminded me of our imaginary library." She sent back a picture of the basil on her balcony, grown a little wild. "We made good weather," she wrote. A rumor tried once more to rattle the windows. It didn't get far. The town, the crew, the film itself, each answered with the same sentence: "We're busy building." The quiet turning. On a gray morning late that year, they found themselves in the same city for different reasons and the same reason. Schedules aligned the way birds do when wind cooperates. They met at a cafe that hadn't redecorated since the year it became comfortable. He brought a paperback, she brought a letter she thought she might give him and then decided to keep. "How are your hands?" she asked, an old joke about careful work. "Learning," he said. "Yours?" "Stained with ink," she smiled. "Which feels like progress." They talked about future projects and the luxury of saying no. They talked about the way craft is a kind of devotion. They did not talk about the past as anything other than a teacher whom they now thanked and let go home. When it was time to leave, he stood and, without choreography, without worry, opened his arms. They hugged the sort of hug that doesn't try to cancel distance. It honors it and meets across it anyway. "See you at the next coastline," he said. "I'll bring a ruler and a map," she replied. Outside, the city's buses hummed their poems. Somewhere a gull was pretending to be inland. The day began again and again until it stuck.